Hey, what up, Henry? Checking in. I see you. Let's go, New York. We here. Just setting it all up. But we here. I'm not gonna use the microphone unless somebody's back. They talking. Waiting for this thing to start. Going to some baseball news real quick. Find my way on the screen. Hold on a minute. There I go. Hopefully you can see me perfectly. Alrighty. Now, let's see what's happening in baseball until this thing starts. Let's see. Oh, Henry, you think
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our virtual curator circle program, Museum Treasures. I'll dive into a little bit of a introduction here sooner than later, closer to that 6 o'clock hour. This is actually one of my favorite parts of all of this digital programming that the Yankees are presenting, because I love to hear where folks are joining us from. So go ahead and utilize that chat function. Just to let you know, you'll only be chatting myself and a couple of people on the back end that work for the Yankees. So don't be shy. Let us know where you're joining us from today. Michelle, welcome. Westwood, New Jersey in the house. Scarsdale. I actually looked at a place in Scarsdale, almost wound up living there when I first moved here.
I don't see
San Luis Obispo in the house. Carrie, welcome. Love the Madonna Inn. I've been up there myself. Born and raised in California, actually. New Jersey. All right. Got a lot of Jersey in the house so far. Bruce, welcome to the program from Tavares, Florida. I believe that's how you say it, Tavares. New Jersey in the house. Long Beach, California. Used to love going to dirt bag games down there. Dan, good old, what is that, First Street or something like that? Down in they had a place there called Taco Surf. Love that spot.
That Aaron Boone is a pawn.
Oh, I love it. Long Island's in the house. Cromwell. Cornwell, New York. Franklin Lakes, welcome. 2nd Street, Dan. Yeah, that's right. Utah, welcome. Welcome to the program. Connecticut in the house. Chicago, welcome to the program, John. South Carolina. Oh, I love this. See, this is why I love asking this. You know, it's unfortunate that we can't do a lot of things inside the stadium nowadays, but this digital environment gives us an opportunity to really touch anyone around the entire globe. I love that right when I said that, we have someone joining us from Mexico City. So welcome. That's really cool. We've had, I think so far, the furthest to join me is South Australia. But we've also had Singapore. Now, I haven't Google mapped that yet to see which one's actually further. I would assume South Australia, but I'm not 100% on that because of the way direct flights work and whatnot. Woodbury, Connecticut in the house. Welcome to the program. I live across the street from Yankee Stadium. I'm closer than anyone.
That's me.
That's from Bronx Bomber 2011. Well, I don't know. I live 2 blocks from the stadium, so I don't know who's technically closer. If you're literally across the street, you got me beat. Are these tour videos archived somewhere? Unfortunately, John, we do not record any of our programming. We like to keep all our programming live and on the fly. So none of it's recorded. We very much like to put these together for live audiences. If for any reason you're asking, I always like to mention our virtual tour is available to groups. So, if that's something you have a group that might be interested, a school group, alumni chapter, business organization, church, you kind of name it. Email us at tours@yankees.com. I'm always happy to put together virtual tours for people outside of these programs that run at exact specific hours. So that's always an option as far as reaching people that we otherwise can't make the designated times and slots we have available. Brooklyn, New York in the house. Welcome, Sharon, to the program. Gotta say, I was born and raised in California, so I know my Dodger history pretty well, and whenever I see Brooklyn, I can't help but think of the Brooklyn Dodgers. All right. Well, we're going to get started here in just a minute. I'm going to give one more minute here to see if we get some latecomers to join the program. Not a problem at all. Unfortunately, I wish we were butting up against a game at 7 p.m. for the Yankees, but we're not. Anna in Pasadena. I was born and raised in Glendale, California, so I know Pasadena quite well. And so welcome. Sorry, I said Anna, but Ann, welcome to the program. Small world, I tell you, small world, especially this digital environment really paints that picture clearly of just how small the world can really be. All right. I'm going to go ahead and kind of get things started here. We've had a slow, it looks like with a bulk of people are in. So if we get some trickles in, that's absolutely fine. No big deal. Glendale, Casey Stengel's hometown. Absolutely. Glendale is, that's John. I'm impressed that you knew that. I was actually born at the same hospital that Casey Stengel passed away at. I guess I didn't inherit his brilliant managerial baseball mindset, because that is not the path I wound up on. All right, folks. So welcome to the program. My name is Brett. Welcome. I'm very, very honored to have all of you join us today. I look forward to sharing, everything today with you guys. And what we're here for today. This is what is known as it's part of our virtual curator circle. It's known as Museum Treasures. This is the second episode. Now, don't worry if you didn't join us for episode 1. We can't really think of a better term than episodes, but we will be exploring today pieces from our museum, hand-selected pieces by our museum curator, who will be a special guest and join us in just a minute here. But he has selected these pieces as some of his favorites, some of the pieces within the museum that really tell some of the best stories or are really unique pieces, and we're going to share some of those today with you. These pieces are going to be specific to the years from 1949 through 1978. And a little bit about the Yankees Museum. You'll see a great picture of it right here in front of you. The museum is located, obviously, at the ballpark. It's open on game days. It's also part of our regular occurring stadium tour when we're operating. But I always like to mention and just highlight that it's so important to me that you don't visit the museum just once. And what I mean by that is, Brian Richards, who is our museum curator, he spends a lot of time during the off season preparing at least one new exhibit for every season. So just because you were in the museum one year doesn't mean that you know what it looks like the next year. And in fact, during the year, sometimes 2 different displays will be unveiled, maybe one in the middle of summer, one towards the end of summer. You never know. So my best words of advice, always come a little bit early to the game, always go in the museum, because on top of that, you're always going to maybe run into something new that you never noticed there before. Now, Brian Richards, I mentioned, is who we have to thank for all this. Brian joined the New York Yankees back in 2008. He was actually, believe this, folks, the first museum professional in Yankee Stadium or Yankees organizational history. Mm-hmm. And why I like to say that is, it's crazy when you think about the length of monumental players and moments throughout the Yankees history, that it took all the way till 2008 for someone to say, we got to build a space that pays homage to these players. And Brian, he's joining us today. There he is. Welcome to the program. And I just want to say thank you for taking the time. And also, I've only been here 3 years, coming up on, my 3rd season next year with the Yankees. But I have to say, you do an incredible job. And I'm so honored that we get to pick your brain today.
Brett, I appreciate all those kind words. Believe me, it's a pleasure to join you this evening. I consider myself a teller of stories. That's how I define being a museum curator. And I firmly believe that no sports franchise has a story, a rich history like the New York Yankees. So as you mentioned, we do try to rotate our exhibits from year to year because there's so many legendary heroes, famous teams, milestone moments to feature in our museum, and only so much space within to feature those great players, teams, and moments. So, this is just a selection of pieces that we have on display right now. If you don't see something from a certain player or a certain event you're a fan of, fear not. Next time you come back to the museum, there's a very good chance there will be something from that team player moment. This is just a completely subjective list. I freely admit that. These are just some of my favorite pieces that I feel are most interesting, that have the greatest stories, and draw the most attention. So I'm really excited to share some stories behind some museum treasures today. Brett, I know you are too. Let's just jump in, okay?
Absolutely. And folks, as we jump into this and we're going to move to our first piece in a second here, I just want to let you know, utilize the chat function. One thing about this program that is very important to Brian and I is when we're talking about a piece, if you have a question about that specific piece, utilize the chat function, ask away. Maybe it's about the player that piece is specifically related to, or maybe even a question about something that Brian mentions or I mentioned that you want to hear more about. Utilize that chat function to ask those questions. We're going to get to as many as we can. We obviously we want to be cognizant of everyone's time. So we're going to get to as much as we can, but anything not related, maybe specifically to the piece, or maybe it's Yankee general history, we'll try to pick those up on the back end. We will have some time for a Q&A to touch on those things. And also always keep your eyes on the slides, because you'll notice throughout the presentation, there might be some little action buttons, not buttons, but pop-ups that tell real little important quips and facts that you might have never known otherwise. And to kick things off, this is actually a really cool piece that's inside the museum. It's a silver plate that was dedicated to the 5 consecutive World Series championships won by the Yankees from 49 to 53, which also coincides with one of my personal favorites in the museum. I know we unfortunately don't have any photos of it here, but the 1953 World Series ring actually has this beautiful 5 in the center of it, where the bottom half of the 5 encompasses the diamond that's centered on it. Beautiful piece. I think the plate's a little more special, specifically this one, though.
Well, they're both special, Brett. They both relate to an incredible championship dynasty. That 1953 ring, Yogi Bera always said was his favorite. And I figure if it's good enough for Yogi, it's good enough for anybody. But we'll jump into Yogi in just a little bit later in the program. This is an amazing token from, as I said, an unmatched dynasty. The Yankees won the World Series championship 5 consecutive years, 1949 through 1953. It's a record that had never been approached before. It's never been approached since. And following the 1953 World Series, the Yankees presented these silver plates to all the players, the executives on the team, managers and coaches as well. Now, this one is just a little bit tarnished, but it has a very special owner. This is actually owned by Mickey Mantle's sons. This is the plate that was presented to Mickey Mantle for being the star center fielder. He was a young star on the rise, only 21 years old throughout the 1953 season. And what's so unique about that dynasty is this was Casey Stengel's first 5 years managing the Yankees. 5 years, 5 World Series titles. You can't do any better than that. When he jumped into the managerial seat in 1949, he inherited a team that people didn't expect much from. You know, he had a great starting pitching rotation with guys like Allie Reynolds, Vic Raschi, Ed Lopat, Tommy Byrne. But as far as position players, Phil Rizzuto was in the prime of his career, but a lot of his players were older guys from before World War II, Joe DiMaggio, Tommy Henrik, Charlie Keller, Johnny Lindell, and a lot of younger players too, who were very talented, but kind of on the raw side, like Yogi Bera, Joe Collins, Jerry Coleman, Bobby Brown. But Casey was such a brilliant teacher that he helped develop this young talent, and he mastered the platoon system, something he'd learned a quarter century before from John McGraw with the New York Giants, where he would use different players at the same position, sometimes even changing players within a game based on each player's respective strengths and weaknesses, so he could get maximum production. And through that 5-year dynasty, as older players like Joe DiMaggio retired, younger stars were developed, guys brought up through the Yankees farm system. Mickey Mantle, Gil McDougald, Whitey Ford, all emerged as stars. So by the end of the 1953 season, there were only about 10 or 12 guys who had been on all 5 teams, but yet the team had won those 5 World Series in a row. Now, to celebrate clinching the pennant, the American League Championship in 1953, the Yankees hosted a dinner at the Stadium Club at Yankee Stadium. Well, a few players thought that maybe a little more celebration was in order for 5 championships in a row. So Mickey Mantle, Whitey Ford, Billy Martin, you know there's going to be a fun story when you have those 3, along with Hank Bauer, I believe Gene Woodling, and 2 other rookie players went down to the Latin Quarter nightclub on the east side of Manhattan to celebrate a little bit further. And while they were there, they had some steaks, probably had a few drinks too, quite a celebration. And the waiter brought the bill over. It was somewhere around $250. Now, $250 was a lot of money back in 1953, even for 6 or 7 or 8 players celebrating together. Billy Martin pulled out his wallet. He had a wad of cash on him. He was willing to pay for everybody. But then they decided, no. We should break up the bill and separate it evenly. And Whitey Ford, God rest his soul, Whitey Ford, he was always the instigator. Whitey Ford came up with the idea, you know what, Dan Topping, the president and owner of the Yankees, is actually sitting at a table around the corner. Let's sign the check to him. He's got $1 million. He can pay it. So he wrote Dan Topping on the top of the check and all the other players that signed their names underneath. Well, apparently this check was actually taken to Mr. Topping, and he was somewhat less than pleased by what had happened. So the next day, Billy Martin and Mickey Mantle both received a very angry phone call from the Yankees front office saying that what they had done was actually forgery. It was a crime. There was, possible legal repercussions, but we're going to settle for fining each of you guys $500. $500 each for a collective $250 bill. Well, the Yankees went on and beat the Brooklyn Dodgers in the World Series that year and in 6 games. And at the celebration following the World Series, Mickey Mantle and Billy Martin both went over to Dan Topping, and Topping pulled out his checkbook and wrote each of them out a check for $500 to refund the fine. And they went over to Whitey Ford, who was sitting separately, and said, Whitey, Mr. Topping's refunding the money. You should go over and get your $500 back. And Whitey, who didn't appreciate the fine in the first place, told him what he could go do with his $500. And of course, as usual, they blame Billy Martin for this because Billy usually was the scapegoat, even though Whitey was the genius behind it. But that celebration continued when these silver plates were given out. And I know it's a little bit hard to see the signatures, but this plate's actually divided into 4 different quadrants. Huh. If you look on the top of it, manager Casey Stengel and the coaches have their signatures, along with general manager George Weiss. On the left side are all the pitchers, along with team president and co-owner Dan Topping. On the right side are the catchers and infielders, along with co-owner and vice president Del Webb. And on the bottom are all the outfielders with Gus Mauch, who was the team's trainer. So it's like they had one different Yankees personnel executive, if you will, in each of the quadrants to keep an eye on everybody. So this is just a great memento of a championship dynasty of the late 40s and early 1950s. It's a record which I really feel certain in saying no team will ever be able to match or surpass.
We do have one question, Brian, which is, so were they given to all players and owner? Like who? I think what the question's getting at is who specifically received plates and didn't.
Sure, all the players who were on the 1953 Yankees received them, along with the coaches, manager Casey Stengel, and the front office executives. There really weren't very many front office executives in those days, but general manager George Weiss, the team president and vice president, Dan Topping and Del Webb would have received them. I'm not sure if they went to the team broadcasters or to the training staff, anybody additional, but in those days, teams really didn't have extensive player rosters, and you had a much more limited front office in those days. But yeah, everybody who was on the team as a player, coach, manager, or executive would have received one of these silver plates.
Gotcha. Very cool. Well, we're going to move on to the next piece here. And it's something I think I'll take the reins on.
That's right, Bray. You take the reins on this one. I'll give you a little bit of an intro on this. This program is very Mickey Mantle heavy, which I don't think anybody here is going to mind that too badly. But this piece is just a great piece from the prime of Mickey Mantle's career. It's from the spring of 1956, Memorial Day to be exact, when Mickey Mantle was absolutely on top of the baseball world. Everything that could go right was going right during that 1956 season, and this baseball was really a symbol of Mantle's success that year. So, Brett, why don't you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, and it's funny. I was thinking about when I was going to talk about this a little while ago, and I said, a lot of the pieces that we talk about, we say how they're unique because they're one of a kind. Now, this is sort of two of a kind, and both, though, done by one man, Mickey Mantle. Believe it or not, folks, if you're familiar with Yankee Stadium, or maybe you've joined us for a virtual tour and you've seen me talk about this or been at the ballpark, you're familiar with the Yankee Stadium frieze. Now, the frieze sits approximately about 117 feet in height at the ballpark. Mickey Mantle is the only ball player, home or visiting club, doesn't matter, to ever hit a ball during a gameplay, official gameplay, off of the frieze. So imagine that, folks. You're batting at the plate and you hit a ball so hard that it flies all the way up 117 feet high and hits the frieze on the fly. Now, again, let me back up a little. The frieze, for anyone that doesn't know, is the awning which sits at the very top of the ballpark. It's basically where the lights are at Yankee Stadium. And so a little bit of a Wonder Boy shot, that old movie, The Natural, right? Kind of that moment, but Mickey Mantle actually did that, just minus missing the lights by about 18 inches. Mm-hmm. And He did it twice, though. He did it, as Brian mentioned, on Memorial Day, nonetheless, May 30th in 1956. He also did it on back in 1963, and he's the only player, as I mentioned, to do it twice. We actually have that 1956 ball, which is the ball you see here, on display in the museum. Now, what's a little special to me to highlight on the ball is it's a little faded at this point, but Mickey did receive this ball afterwards, and he actually made the ball out to Eddie Robinson, and he said, to Eddie, my best wishes, Mickey Mantle. And Eddie Robinson actually put the ball on display at his restaurant in Baltimore. Mm-hmm. So just a fun little fact about how it was inscribed. But as Brian mentioned, it was, 1956 was really everything coming together for Mickey. This was his 19th home run. They were actually playing a doubleheader that day, and he hit his 20th home run in the preceding game. 20 home runs through May 30th. Now remember, folks, 20 home runs through May 30th today, you would think, oh, that's about a third of the season. That's incredible. You're on pace for about 60 home runs. But keep in mind, and Brian filled me in on this, back in 1956, baseball season didn't start till the middle of April. So over about 6 weeks, believe it or not, Mickey had 20 home runs. The pace there could have been closer to, 65, 70-ish. He finished the season with 52 home runs, 130 RBIs, and a .353 batting average. And as I mentioned, not only the Triple Crown winner, but obviously the most valuable player within the American League. I think we actually have a question here. Mm-hmm. Now, I think, Brian, you have a good answer for this. If not, I can take it. Did they ever estimate the distance in which it traveled? Right. I know that's a tough one.
Right. It's really hard to estimate how far a ball would have traveled. That's generally the question is, well, if it would have gone all the way out of the stadium, how far would it have traveled? Because really, it didn't travel that awful far. When you consider A squared plus B squared equals C squared, it didn't really travel that far because it did bounce off the freeze, but it was a very, very high baseball. So, as far as how far would it have traveled is the question most people generally ask. It's impossible to know because we don't know if the ball was technically still rising a little bit or if it had plateaued. When you're 117 feet down on the ground in the playing field, it's a little bit difficult to know exactly what the ball is doing. But, it certainly was a tremendous shot. And had it gone all the way out of the stadium, it's unfathomable how far it would have traveled, really. I mean,
and to that point,
scientific estimates, but, it's just impossible to know, really.
And to Brian's point there, folks, it's really, I think, special to note, not only has no ball player ever achieved this, and Mickey managed to do it twice, right, but no ball has ever left Yankee Stadium, whether it was to left field or right field or dead center, anywhere. I know some folks out there might believe that Josh Gibson did that, but that has been debunked 100%. He hit a ball that landed well into the bullpen, but did not, in fact, leave the entire ballpark.
Right.
So just because I know that's usually a follow-up question there. Now, moving on, because we're talking about grandiose home runs, I feel it's such a good transition to highlight and talk about a really unique piece that sits inside the museum. And I'm so glad you shared this with everyone today, Brian, because it is, in fact, unique. Even when you walk in the museum and you see it, you kind of say, what the heck is that?
Right. It definitely makes people do a double take, and for good reason, too. This item has to do with a great term in baseball's lexicon. April 17, 1953, the Yankees were playing the Washington Senators at Griffith Stadium in Washington, D.C., and Mickey Mantle was batting against Chuck Stobbs, a left-handed pitcher, so Mickey was batting right-handed, and he crushed a home run that went sailing far, far out of Griffith Stadium. Now, Griffith Stadium was a massive ballpark. It had a huge outfield. I think it was something close to 400 feet down the left field foul line. It went out even further because of the bleachers, plus there are about 32 rows of bleachers that went beyond center field. So to put a ball out of the ballpark was unprecedented. And Mickey actually crushed this baseball far out of the park. It actually bounced off of the corner of a football scoreboard that the Redskins would have used and went far out of Griffith Stadium. Now, granted, there was a little bit of a wind stream. There were gusts of winds that were blowing that afternoon in that direction. So, yes, the ball had just a little bit of help, but you still have to be able to hit it to get it that far. Now, that home run was announced as having traveled alternately, it was said 563 or 565 feet. And Arthur Patterson, who was the Yankees public relations director, was the one who submitted that estimate to the writers. The story went that Patterson actually walked outside Griffith Stadium and measured it out foot by foot to where he found the baseball. In truth, he never actually left the ballpark. A young man named Donald Dunaway found the baseball, brought it back to Griffith Stadium. It was taken into the clubhouse and given back to Mickey Mantle. The ball and bat actually are on display at the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown now, actually, from this tremendous home run. So the 565 is a total fabrication. Well, 3 years later, Mickey was in the middle of his Triple Crown season, as we said. 1956, he actually had injured his knee in a game at Boston. So prior to this game in Washington, he took batting practice, batting both left-handed and right-handed, crushed the ball both directions, but he didn't play at the game. He actually was wearing a knee brace. And that day, Mickey was actually honored in a ceremony that commemorated this massive home run he had hit 3 years earlier. The Virginia Association of Surveyors actually presented this 600-foot steel tape measure to Mickey Mantle. It's gold-plated, and the idea is that only a piece of equipment of this length could properly measure the distance of Mantle's home runs. Now, the little plaque you see on there was created later on. The May 1956 date is misleading. Mickey actually didn't play at Washington in May 1956. 585, the number's off there a little bit, but the idea is more based around the tape measure itself. And Mickey's home runs were so long, this actually gave birth to the term tape measure home run. Now, we use that term pretty commonly today to describe the longest home runs that are hit, not just your typical, garden variety shot into the right field grandstand. These are really the longest home runs, and that's what Mickey Mantle was capable of doing. I don't know if any player ever had the pure power, home run power, that Mickey Mantle had, let alone from both sides of the plate as a switch hitter. So, Brett, I really feel like that baseball that was hit off the freeze and this tape measure are so indicative of Mickey's overall home run hitting skills.
We actually have a question that was asked in relation to, I bet they were listening when you were talking about batting right-handed and left-handed.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Do you happen to know which side of the plate Mickey hit the majority of his home runs from?
He hit more home runs batting left-handed. And he explained later on the reason why he batted left-handed more. Number one, there are more right-handed pitchers in baseball. So when a lefty's batting against a righty, the break on a breaking ball, a curveball, or a slider is going to be a little bit more favored to the guy who bats from the other side. And number two, Yankee Stadium, the contours of Yankee Stadium are much more favorable to a left-handed power hitter. With that short porch in right field, Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, guys like that, Reggie Jackson later on, were able to take advantage of that left-handed stroke, hitting the ball into the right field seats. For right-handers, you're hitting into what was called Death Valley. Left center field was cavernous, and Joe DiMaggio throughout his whole career really suffered with his power numbers at Yankee Stadium because of that. So Mickey was a much better hitter for average, a much better technical hitter batting right-handed. His lifetime batting average right-handed was about 50 points higher than his left-handed batting average. Wow. But his power stroke from either side was basically about equal. But yes, to answer your question, he definitely hit more home runs. I would estimate probably about 2/3 of his home runs batting lefty over batting righty. Good question. Mm-hmm.
All right. Let's go to the next piece here, which is another legendary. I think there's one consistency when you talk about the Yankees is you're going to talk about legendary players.
Right.
And, I guess we could say piggybacking, right, a bit off of Mickey Mantle in that incredible 1956 season, right, and maybe even spurring a lot of, protection that came with having to pitch to Mickey was this gentleman, Mr. Yogi Bera.
Well, that's right, Brett. At that time, Mickey primarily hit third in the batting order, but Yogi Bera, our Hall of Fame catcher, was batting clean up behind him, giving him some protection in the batting order. And I think Yogi was so important in that he was really the bridge between the Joe DiMaggio years and the prime of Mickey Mantle's career. For 7 consecutive years, 1949 through 1955, Yogi led the Yankees in runs batted in. And in his, 7 prime seasons, 1950 to 1956, he had 191 home runs and 166 strikeouts. That means he had 25 more home runs than he had strikeouts over that 7-year span. So from the time when DiMaggio was kind of starting to age in his later years and his retirement, through the early years of Mickey Mantle's career when he was still really developing as a slugger, Yogi was really the glue that held that team together. Manager Casey Stengel depended on him completely, calling him his assistant manager. Yogi was brilliant at getting maximum performance out of each pitcher, knowing their strengths and weaknesses. As we mentioned, he was an RBI machine. He excelled with runners on base. Great bad ball hitter, wasn't afraid to reach outside of the strike zone if it was necessary to make contact and drive in some runs. 1956, he had 30 runs batted in to tie his own record for most homers in a season by a catcher, 105 runs batted in. But his World Series performance that year against the Brooklyn Dodgers was really a microcosm of his abilities. Yogi hit 3 home runs in 4 plate appearances off Don Newcomb, who was the Brooklyn Dodgers star pitcher. First time up, he walked. Second time, he hit a grand slam. And in Game 7, he hit a pair of 2-run homers off Don Newcomb. And that's no small potatoes. That's a pretty great accomplishment of a legendary pitcher from that era. But he called a great game, too. And the most important game that Yogi called was Don Larsen's perfect game, of course, in Game 5 of the 1956 World Series against the Dodgers. Now, Larsen, of course, in a perfect game, did not allow a single base runner throughout the game, and Yogi was really the mastermind behind that. He called it the easiest game that he ever caught. He said he just put down the signal, put up the glove, and Larsen put the ball in the glove. Larsen never shook him off. There was only one 3-ball count in the entire game, and that was to Pee Wee Reese, the second batter of the entire game. And Yogi said throughout the game he wasn't focused so much on the fact that it was a perfect game, but that the score was only 2-0. And he knew that if one runner reached base, the next batter potentially could tie the game. So that was his greatest concern, was keeping runners off base because of the score. So Yogi, really was a great baseball mind, a great contributor to Yankee success, and he has 10 World Series championships. 1 World Series for each finger on each hand, and that in itself is a World Series record. So this uniform that Yogi wore during the 1956 season, in the heart of his Hall of Fame career, he wore it for home games at Yankee Stadium during the World Series. Don Larsen's perfect game. It was said that there was Bera's luck, and this really is Bera's luck all coming together right there, like I said, in the heart of his career.
We actually have a question from our local, that's Bronx Bomber 2011.
Right.
Did he use this jersey for the whole season, or how many did they wear throughout a season regularly?
Right. Great question. In those days, players usually received 2 home and 2 road uniforms per season. So you had 4 uniforms that you would use throughout the year. And you consider there's 77 home, 77 road games in those days. So you're probably going to wear this uniform for 35 to 40 games per season. And then they would be laundered and tailed a little bit, just make sure they look extra good for the World Series. So, 2 home, 2 road is really common for that era. And this uniform, it's a little hard to see in this photo, but when you study it up close, there's definitely a lot of wear on it.
Another good question, which is funny because I was actually going to ask you this question myself, because I realized I don't think I've ever asked you this.
All right.
What's your favorite Yogiism?
My favorite Yogiism is always go to other people's funerals. Otherwise, they might not come to yours.
Oh, that's good. I always think about the fork in the road. When you come to the fork in the road, take it. That's just a good one.
Exactly. And Brett, we were talking about Yogi's 1956 season. I'm just going to interject here for a second.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Just a little fun fact I realized last night is the first 30 games of the 1956 season, basically a full month, Yogi Bera not only played every single game of those 30 games as a catcher, he caught every single inning. If it was a doubleheader, if there was extra innings, didn't matter. Just imagine today a catcher catching complete games in the first 30 games of a team season. Plus, he had 12 home runs and was batting over 400 during those first 30 games until they actually pulled a muscle in his hip. That's the first thing that got him out of the lineup. So that was Yogi, his durability, his production in the lineup every day, supporting Mickey Mantle. Again, this is Yogi Bera, is really the bridge between 2 dynasties, creating a dynasty of his own, really.
Yeah, and you and I harped on it. We were talking about great catching throughout Yankee history. Right. And I think folks out there, maybe I only kind of started putting that together recently, doing the math of Bill Dickey, Yogi Bera, Elston Howard, Thurman Munson, Jorge Posada, these great dynasties with great catching. It just, to your point, really proves how vital and important a core catcher is to a team's success.
Right. It's absolutely true, Brett. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, staying on Mickey, because I know we have a lot of Mickey fans in the house, always on these programs. And I think this is definitely, one of the big fan favorites to see also in the museum, as this beautiful Mickey Mantle glove from 1956.
Right. Yeah, we're in a little bit of a 1956 rut, but I don't think that's really an issue. That's really the heart of the Yankees' greatest dynasty right there. Yeah, we've talked about Mickey's Triple Crown season, how lethal he was with the bat, but he was just as good with the glove, too. Mickey was a fine outfielder, And, he had blazing speed, of course, great natural speed, a tremendous athleticism, and a cannon of an arm. So when you put all those ingredients together, he really was one of the American League's premier center fielders. He loved playing center field, loved all the expansive ground that he could cover from left to right. He developed a very accurate throwing arm by the mid-1950s, and he was actually using this leather late in the 1956 regular season. So he actually used it on into the World Series in 1956. And we mentioned Don Larsen's perfect game earlier in Game 5 of the World Series. Well, Don, of course, was the biggest star of that game, but really I would give Mickey second billing in that game, probably put Yogi in third. Mickey came up to the plate in the bottom of the fourth inning with 2 outs, and a lot of people don't realize this. Sal Magley, the Brooklyn Dodgers pitcher, had a perfect game going to that point. He had retired the Yankees' first 11 batters, but Mickey hit a line drive home run, just fair, down the right field foul line, batting left-handed, for the first, not only the first base runner, but the first run of the game. And the game, as I mentioned earlier, was a 2-0 game. So that run was really, really important. But in every perfect game, it seems like there's always an amazing defensive gem. And Mickey was the guy who made that defensive gem happen in Don Larsen's perfect game. Top of the fifth, I should say, rather. Gil Hodges was batting for Brooklyn. Hit a line drive, sinking line drive, deep into left center field, cavernous left center field at Yankee Stadium. Now, had that ball dropped in, it would have been an easy double, possibly a triple. For all we know, maybe even more, but it was definitely a ball that had to be caught. Mickey was shaded a little bit over toward the right field side, but he ran across center field as only Mickey Mantle in his prime could run. And at the last minute, he made a backhanded catch of that ball. It was an out for Gil Hodges, and the perfect game was preserved. So really, that play, I would put that on par with the famous over-the-shoulder catch that Willie Mays had made in the World Series 2 years before. But this just shows the overall skill that Mickey Mantle had. He wasn't just a power hitter or a guy who hit for great average. His defense, his throwing, his speed, his base running, Mickey Mantle was the total package in the mid-1950s. Oh, and I should mention, too, sorry, I forgot to talk about the glove itself. It's a Rawlings HH model, HH for Harvey Haddix. It was named after Harvey Haddix, the pitcher. And Mickey actually owned a Holiday Inn franchise in Joplin, Missouri from the mid-1950s for several decades. So this glove was actually displayed in a trophy case in the lounge of Mickey Mantle's Holiday Inn from the late 1950s to the late 1970s. Mickey actually autographed it in green pen. You can see it at the bottom of the top photo. It's also been on display at the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, at the Babe Ruth Birthplace Museum in Baltimore, Maryland, and we're certainly proud to display it at Yankee Stadium as one of our museum treasures. I got so wrapped up in the perfect game, I forgot to talk about the piece itself.
Yeah, I actually want to share, Fernando wanted to share one of his favorite Yogiisms, not to go back, but I thought it was pretty good. Love is the most important thing in the world, but baseball is pretty good too.
I'll agree with that.
I'd have to tip the cap of that one as well.
That's right, absolutely.
I don't, let me see. I'm trying to decipher this question from Trent. What is the difference between the top or bottom of any go in inning? What is the top of an inning? Oh,
the top of the bottom of the inning. Sure.
There we go.
The top and the bottom of the inning. Each inning that's played in a baseball game, the home team and the road team both bat. So the road team always bats first in the inning. So that's called the top half of the inning. And as soon as they make their 3 outs, then the home team bats in what's called the bottom of the inning. So the road team always goes first. The home team always comes second. So that's called the top and the bottom of the inning.
Great
question.
Yeah, absolutely. And don't be afraid, folks. You know, if you got some general baseball questions, we're always happy to try our best to answer them. Tell you, like, I can always tip my cap to Brian. I'm always impressed. He won't admit it, but if I have to put a number on it, I'd say it's about 96.5% of Yankee history Brian knows. And he probably knows at least, I'd say, 80% of overall baseball history. There's a wealth of knowledge here, so don't be shy.
Folks, don't believe him. Don't believe him. I count myself blessed to work at something I love and love what I work at. And I'm telling stories, so many great stories here. You're asking great questions. I'm having a ball, so let's keep it going. Trent,
yeah.
I'm sorry, Brad, rather. What do we got next?
Right here, I have to tell you, I think that, Roger Maris, his 61 mark, it stood for so long, and it was so special because it broke a long-standing mark by, arguably the greatest home run hitter of all time. and it lasted for decades. And then,
Right.
The 61 mark stood for so long. And I think it's so special that we actually have the home run jersey, number 61 jersey, sitting in the museum from that historic 61 season of Roger Maris's.
Well, that's right, Brett. Roger Maris in 1961 was in a season-long home run duel with Mickey Mantle. They were both hitting copious amounts of home runs, and the question is, could either player hit 61 homers in 1961? And Mickey Mantle ended the season with 54 home runs, which was a career best for him. Roger Maris kept on slugging, and on the final day of the 1961 regular season, he hit his 61st home run to surpass Babe Ruth's record, 60 home runs that was set back in 1927. So this was a tremendous feat, and I love this piece because it's so representative of a really sacred number in baseball history. This isn't just a Yankees number. This is a record that changed all of baseball. And this is the uniform jersey that Roger was wearing when he hit that home run. Now, what's so interesting about this uniform, it's actually a 1960 uniform from the previous season, which was Roger's first year playing for the New York Yankees. In those days, uniforms were actually cut from bolts of pinstripe fabric. They would be manufactured with the pinstripes on them, and the bolts were cut, and the uniforms were assembled, buttons sewed on, the NY crest sewn on the front of the home uniforms, the numeral sewn onto the back of all the uniforms. And based on where the fabric was cut and where the NY crest was put on, the alignment of the NY crest and the alignment of the number on the back, the alignment of the shoulders, even where the fabric is sewn together, would vary just a little bit from one uniform to the next. Look at that number 9 on the back of this. See how the left side of it just barely touches the pinstripe? Now, in the next Roger Maris uniform, that number 9 might be halfway between two different pinstripes. And that wasn't done intentionally. It's just based on where the fabric is cut. But that differentiation between where numerals and the NY crest and the shoulders, where they separate, how they connect together, is almost like a fingerprint on these older uniforms. It's a little harder to do with the double knit uniforms that are worn today, but for these older uniforms, it's a little bit of a fingerprint. So for years, people wondered, well, what happened to the uniform that Roger wore when he hit number 61? Because none of the 1961 uniforms seemed to match the photos that were taken of Roger that day. There's no shortage of photos. Well, somebody found this 1960 uniform from the previous year that was Roger's uniform, and people looked at it and said, we may have something here. And these photos were compared against this uniform. And as I said, there was intensive study done, no shortage of photos, intensive study at every single point on the NY crest. I think that crest right there. I think there's like 20 or 25 or something like that unique points on that crest. Every point of the numeral 9 on the back matched this uniform perfectly. And that uniform does not match, or excuse me, there are no other uniforms that match that. So by process of elimination, this absolutely is the uniform that Roger wore when he hit number 61. Pete Sheehy was our clubhouse manager in those days. And Pete would actually set aside a uniform at the end of the year. If it was in good shape, fold it up, put it in a trunk, keep it as a backup for the following year in case the players' next year uniforms needed some alterations, some tailoring, some repairs, laundering, that sort of thing. Well, keep in mind, Roger hit that home run on the last day of the regular season. And the World Series was scheduled to start at Yankee Stadium just a few days later. So all of the 1961 uniforms were out being laundered. So Pete gave Roger his uniform from the previous season to wear that day. And Roger was actually wearing a year-old uniform from 1960 when he hit that 61st home run. You look at the photos here, you see in the photo on the left, Spalding was the manufacturer. 44 is actually the uniform size. And underneath the 60 signifies the year it was created for the 1960 season. On the right, all the uniforms in those days were actually identified by a little cotton tag that was sewn into the back of the uniform with the player's last name on it. So that does say Maris. And Brett, we get a lot of questions actually about the sleeves on Roger's uniform. If you just want to go back for 1 second, a lot of people notice that the sleeves on Roger's uniform are very short, especially in comparison to Mickey Mantle's uniform sleeves, which are a little bit more traditional, a little bit longer, a little closer to the elbow. And Roger Maris's son has actually said that he being Roger himself, preferred wearing these shorter sleeves because they were more comfortable for him. He had bulging biceps, as did Mickey Mantle, but in Roger's case, he just felt it was more comfortable with the size of his arms to have a little bit shorter sleeves. So that's why the sleeves are just a little bit shorter here than on other Yankees uniforms of that era.
We actually have two people asking the same question here. So
let's hear that.
I'll let you just, I'll throw it out there. I'll kind of summarize it.
Okay.
But they've noticed that a lot of the pieces have credits to a Dr. Richard C. Angrist, maybe I'm saying that wrong.
Right.
They were just wondering, two questions kind of come from this. One, if you have a little bit about his background,
Sure.
where he accumulates pieces. And number two, how are most of the pieces on loan in the museum?
I'll answer number two first because they're both excellent questions. Most of the pieces we have actually are loaned by private collectors. I like to say that not all the great pieces of art or sculpture in the world are at the Louvre or the Metropolitan Museum of Art or the MFA up in Boston. A lot of those pieces are in private collections. Well, it's the same thing too with baseball pieces. Not all those pieces were necessarily retained by the teams or players, and they're not all at the Baseball Hall of Fame either. Many of these pieces are in private collections. So our museum does borrow a lot of game use pieces from private collectors, sometimes from team alumni, as you're going to see in just a little bit here. From different sources, we borrow a lot of these pieces specifically for the exhibits that we have, because as Brett articulated earlier, we do rotate our exhibits, change things out from year to year. So we borrow pieces specifically for those displays and then send them back to the owners afterward. Dr. Angrist is a private collector. He really loves to collect pieces from the 4 New York teams, the Yankees, the Brooklyn Dodgers, the New York Giants, and the New York Mets, specifically players with retired numbers. So his passion is collecting uniform jerseys, bats, caps, team signed baseballs from those legendary Yankees, Giants, Dodgers, and Mets teams. And he's assembled just an incredible collection. So he's very generous in lending pieces from his collection to our museum. And we're nice enough to say yes.
Yeah. Very, very cool. Collecting's a tough game to be in. I'll tell you that.
That's right. Outstanding.
Now, we gotta jump to this, and I get excited because I love that you kind of peel back the layers here a little bit for the folks at home. That you have the great shot here of the interior of this Whitey Ford glove, where there are some let's call them notes inscribed,
instructions, memo list. Call it what you will. Whitey Ford, first off, just passed away 1 week ago this evening. Whitey, I think, was the greatest pitcher in Yankees history. Just a tremendous athlete, tremendous competitor, our true ace of the 1950s and 1960s. He was the guy managers pitched in must-win games. And, his name dominates the Yankees record book. So, the stories we tell about Whitey, like I said earlier, about signing that check to Dan Topping, some of the stories we're going to share here, we're sharing a smile and sharing a laugh in Whitey's memory. But Whitey actually used this glove in 1962 and 63, right in the prime of his career. And 1962, he won 17 games. 1963, he won 24 games to lead the American League. But Whitey was known to be a little, let's call him creative with some of baseball's rules, especially in the latter half of his career. Some people would say he was cheating. It's not cheating if you don't get caught. But he wasn't afraid to use a spitball of sorts, a mud ball, wasn't afraid to cut the ball a little bit, all of which are very, very illegal in baseball's rule book. But again, it's not cheating if you don't get caught. So this glove was, as I said, used by Whitey in 1962, 63. If you look at the photo on the left, you'll see inside the pocket is written the words cheat, mud, spit, cut, Vaseline, and slippery elm, all of which are completely verboten in baseball's rule book. Now, in full disclosure, I cannot say that this was written by Whitey, and I cannot say that these words were present when Whitey used the glove. Most likely, I think that they were. But that was just part of Whitey's arsenal. He told a great story about in the early to mid-1960s. He went to a friend of his who was a jeweler and had a special ring commissioned. It was a stainless steel band, and he had a small piece of rasp put on the back, kind of like a file, had teeth on it, was very, very sharp. But if you weren't looking at the bottom of the ring, you couldn't see it. So Whitey would pitch with this ring on his right hand. He was left-handed, so he would pitch with this ring on his right hand. It looked like a wedding ring, and he actually would wrap a Band-Aid around it, so it was a little bit disguised. But he was able to scuff the ball anytime he wanted on the pitcher's mound. And by scuffing that ball, it got him a lot of ground ball outs, because a ball that's been doctored in some way, shape, or form, either by scuffing or by one of these very illegal substances that's inside the glove, is a definite advantage to the pitcher. So eventually the umpires figured out what he was doing, and Whitey got rid of the ring very, very quickly. He gave it to Joe Soares, our team trainer. Joe actually threw the ring away, and Whitey said, "That cost me $100. I didn't want it thrown away." But that's just part of the legend of Whitey Ford. As I said, he was a tremendous pitcher, whether it was going by, a little bit creative interpretation of the rule book, or his incredible control, or his great street smarts. it was all part of Whitey's story. So I think it's very fitting that his nickname and the title of his autobiography was Slick.
Quick question that came in was, is there any relation, do you know of, to President Ford?
As far as I know, there's no relation to President Gerald Ford. No, President Ford was from the Grand Rapids, Michigan area, and Whitey was very much a product of Astoria, Queens, right here in New York City. So, no, as far as I know, there's no relation. The Yankees had a pitcher in the early 1900s named Russ Ford. In 1910 or 11, I think Russ Ford won 26 games as a rookie, also with what was called the emery ball. So he would scratch the surface on the ball to make it dart and move around a little bit. So I don't think those Fords were related either, but it does seem like there's a little bit of thinking from 1910 up to the early 1960s.
And we also had a question that I think I can answer if you'd like, which is, what is scuffing? Scuffing is referring to, if you watch baseball games, you'll often see when a ball's fouled in the ground that they disregard the ball. When a ball's hit in play, they commonly disregard it. Scuffing essentially means that there's a rough surface that's created within the leather on the ball, which allows a pitcher to grip the ball a lot more, let's say, intensely. And you're talking about baseball pitchers, they've got these incredibly large hands, and they, like Sandy Koufax, I think a lot about with his ridiculously oversized hands to throw that curveball. But that little bit of scuffing can allow a nail on a finger or, the ball of a thumb in some way to just kind of get in there a little bit more and allow for a pitcher to have better break on a ball, more rotation, just moves the pitch. Remember, a baseball being thrown, the seams are what dictate a lot of the movements on the ball. So that's why the pitchers will use the seams to create movement, whether it's left, right, up, or down, as they throw a pitch.
That's right, Brett. And just building on what you said there, any kind of a mark on the baseball, a cut or a tear, or any sort of liquid that might go onto it, spit or, Vaseline or something like that, can make the ball move in a different direction. It's like you said, it's all about the movement. So any kind of damage to the baseball or liquid on it or something is going to affect how the ball moves when it's coming into the batter. If the ball isn't coming the way that he expects it to come, he's not going to be able to hit it as effectively, maybe hit a ground ball out or pop it up or something like that. So that's a definite benefit to the pitcher. And that's why, damaging the ball or using any kind of illegal substance on the baseball is forbidden in baseball's rules.
Yeah, and that's how Whitey Ford got 236 wins.
36, that's right.
Right here, we have another huge fan favorite. I believe, actually, your pop's favorite piece that he always, every time he comes and visits you at work, he has to see it. This beautiful Mickey Mantle Bat from the World Series.
Well, that's right, Brett. For my dad, Dennis Richards, this is his #1 piece in the Yankees Museum. And a lot of fans would agree with him on this because this bat was used for one of the many milestone home runs in Mickey Mantle's career. We've talked about so many today, and we have to cover a few more. Mickey swung this lumber in the 1964 World Series against the St. Louis Cardinals. Now, Mickey went into that World Series with 15 career World Series home runs. Remember, this guy played in the World Series 12 times in his first 14 years. So October was like, his birthright. It was just what he expected to be able to do. But he had 15 career World Series home runs, which was tied with Babe Ruth's record for most career home runs in the World Series. And in that 1964 World Series, Mickey used this bat to hit home runs number 16, 17, and 18, which remains the World Series record. Now, in Game 3 of that World Series at Yankee Stadium, Mickey was playing right field. He actually played right field throughout that series because his knees were really giving him trouble. He didn't have quite the range he had in the past. So Roger Maris shifted over to center with Tom Tresh in left field. And in Game 3, Mickey actually muffed a fly ball in right field that allowed Tim McCarver to eventually score an unearned run. So going into the bottom of the 9th inning, the score was tied 1-1. And Mickey was really frustrated with himself, knowing that should have been a 1-0 Yankees victory. They should have been back in the clubhouse celebrating and relaxing instead of going to the bottom of the 9th and potentially extra innings. So Mickey stepped up to the plate. And, the Cardinals brought in Barney Schultz, who was a knuckleball throwing reliever. Now, Mickey knew from the scouting report that Schultz's knuckleball was the first pitch he threw was always a little bit more like a fastball. He really wanted to push it just a little bit harder to try and get strike one on that first pitch. And then the ball would really bob and weave and dance and move around like crazy. Knuckleball is very difficult to hit. Well, that first knuckleball that he saw didn't knuckle. It didn't bob. It didn't weave. It wasn't thrown well at all. Mickey recognized that and made the most of it. He crushed that pitch far into the upper deck in right field for a game-winning, game-ending home run. The ovation was tremendous, and there are a lot of Mickey Mantle fans who remember that as being their number one Mickey Mantle moment. Now, he used this bat again in St. Louis in Game 6 and 7. In Game 6, he hit a home run off of I'm forgetting his name off the top of my head. But Game 7, he had a home run off Bob Gibson, who just passed away a few weeks ago, for his 18th home run in World Series competition. And Mickey, as you see here, retired with the most home runs, 18, the most runs scored, 42, the most runs batted in, 40, and most lifetime total bases, 123 in World Series competition. Now, when you look at this bat, a great Louisville Slugger Bat, you see in the photo on the lower left, it was actually stamped on the bat at the factory before the bat was sent up to Yankee Stadium. 1964 World Series. Mickey's signature was stamped right in, and the words New York Yankees for the team. The photo in the upper right shows a lot of history right on the bat itself. You see that strip of green paint after the word Yankees. That's actually from the bat rack at Yankee Stadium. It was wooden. It was painted kind of a seafoam green color. So from that bat rubbing up against the wooden bat rack, some of the paint was exchanged. So that's actually paint from the bat rack. The little blob of red paint that you see under the word world on the left portion of the bat right there is from the bat rack at Busch Stadium in St. Louis, which was painted cardinal red. And the photo in the lower right, that kind of a rainbow-shaped arch right there, is actually a stitch mark. Mickey crushed a baseball in the stitches so hard that he actually impressed the mark of the stitches right into the barrel of the bat itself. And again, like I said, nobody could hit a baseball as hard as Mickey Mantle. So this beautiful 32.5-ounce piece of lumber is a great way for Mickey Mantle to end his World Series career.
We actually have two quick questions. One, what's the length and weight of this bat?
Right. The length is about 35 inches and the weight is 32.5 ounces. So that's just a hair on the longer side for today's bats, but the weight's pretty comparable. Bats today are around 31.5 to 32 ounces. So 32.5 would be perfectly acceptable today. But yeah, bats generally were in that range. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then who manufacturer of this bat, H&B or Louisville Slugger?
Well, it's really the same thing. Hillerich and Bradsby is the company in Kentucky that manufactures these bats, and Louisville Slugger is the model of bat. So it'd be like saying, Chevy Camaro or something like that. Chevy is the manufacturer, Camaro is the model.
Got it.
This is Hillerich and Bradsby is the manufacturer, Louisville Slugger is the model, and they are manufactured in Louisville, Kentucky. That's a great question. I think we take for granted a lot of people know that, but that is a great question. Thank you for asking that.
I did not know that myself, so thank you, Rich and Gail, for asking that question.
These are great questions. Now we get to. I've been talking an awful lot here, so I'm going to throw the ball back in your court. We're actually going to skip ahead a little bit here because we have some great pieces from the Yankees championship teams of the late 1970s. The team won the American League pennant in 1976 and World Series titles in 1977 and 78. And these pieces, being very unique that they are, only used by catchers, actually were used by the cornerstone of those great Yankees teams of the 1970s. Brett, I'm sorry I interrupted you a minute ago. I'm going to shut up and I'm going to let you do the talking here.
No worries at all. And, for me, it's interesting. I worked, as you know, Brian, for a different team for a lot of years. My first career in baseball. Came over to the Yankees about 2 years ago now. And I have to tell you that Thurman's become very important to me when I've learned a lot about not only his playing career, but what he seems to have meant to people on the field and off the field. He just was larger than life. And, before I get to the shin guards, which is what we really want to highlight here, I think it's important to kind of tell that tale, right, of his amazing Hall of Fame career. So Thurman Munson, for folks out there maybe not familiar with the name, he burst on the scene in 1969, making his debut with the Yankees, but 1970 being his full first rookie campaign, and actually obtaining Rookie of the Year honors in the American League that season. Over the next few years, Munson just keeps getting better. He's already good, and he keeps getting better. 73, 74, 75. 3 years in a row, he wins the Gold Glove Award behind the plate for the AL catcher. 1976, keeps getting better, wins the 1976 AL MVP. And I think right then and there, maybe, that was what solidified, his, maybe not solidified, but that season they made him the captain, the first captain for the Yankees named since Lou Gehrig back in when he ended his career in 1939. So a big deal to be named a Yankees captain. And as captain, he goes on to win the MVP. Then he goes back 77 and 78, leading the Yankees to back-to-back World Series titles, just commanding that pitching staff and doing such a great job of calling every game. Then tragedy hits, 1979. For a lot of folks out there might remember this moment. Very tragically, Munson, in an effort to save as much time on travel as he could, he would actually, he had his piloting license, and he would fly home to his family in Camden, Ohio. On a new plane he had purchased, he was practicing some touch-and-go landings one day and tragically lost control of that plane. It did go down, crashed, and we lost Mr. Munson. Left a gaping hole in that team. And remember, they had just gone back-to-back World Series titles. And don't forget that even in 81, they wound up in the World Series. So there was a dynasty being built there. And at the core of that dynasty was Thurman Munson. And, just a huge unexpected loss, obviously. And one of the ways that the Yankees wanted to pay some tribute, specifically Mr. Steinbrenner, to Mr. Munson was they said that no one would ever be able to use his locker again. So his locker stood dormant at Old Yankee Stadium from 1979 until 2008, when they closed the doors at Old Yankee Stadium. When they opened the new doors right across the street in 2009, carpenters went in, disassembled Munson's locker piece by piece, and reconstructed it inside the New York Yankees Museum, where Brian does a great job of taking care of it. And he's added these shin guards actually to that locker as part of the display in there. It's a beautiful, beautiful piece that really highlights, his catching prowess and highlighting a piece of his history. These are actually also, if you look on the bottom left corner here, folks, where it's faint on there now, but they're actually, they're signed by Thurman Munson. And they're the only signed shin guards of Munson's that anyone's aware of in existence. So just a really special piece. And actually, folks, if you ever get to visit the museum or when you've gone in there before, personal note, just the locker is my favorite personal piece within the Yankees Museum because it's so special. Again, much of the team in the organization.
Right. That's right, Brett. And a lot of people feel that way, too. I know several times Diana Munson, who is Thurman's widow, has actually come to Yankee Stadium on Old Timers Day and has come to actually visit the locker in the museum. She doesn't come into the museum every year. She does come for Old Timers Day annually. But when she does come in the museum to see that locker, that's such a special moment. One time she came with Ron Guidry, who was our great ace pitcher of the late 1970s. And Ron and Thurman were both very close, of course. And the two of them stood looking at that locker. Just for a minute, when they turned, they were tears pouring down their cheeks and they hugged each other. I was crying. The security guards were crying. All the guests were around us were crying. We were doling out paper towels left and right because the tears were just flowing. But it just shows how much passion there is for Thurman and how people still love and embrace him more than 40 years after his passing. Brett, I do want to address the question that came up just a little bit ago. Trent asked about what is a Gold Glove Award? You mentioned that Thurman had won that award of 1973 to 1975. The Gold Glove is an award that is given out to the best defensive players in Major League Baseball, both American League and National League. The idea being that gold it's the best. A Golden Glove is given out to the best player at each defensive position. All the catcher, pitcher, all the infielders, all the outfielders at each defensive position in both the American League and the National League. So if you really take pride in your defense and being a good fielder, a Gold Glove is something you really want to win. And Thurman was an excellent defensive catcher. So are there any other questions you want to address right now, Brett?
Yeah, there was one that I caught. I just want to read a comment from Fernando that I thought was really poignant. Thurman Munson is one of my Mount Rushmores of Yankee history with Lou Gehrig, Yogi Bera, and Nelson Howard. I think that's such a interesting way to describe your four favorites. That's a great little anecdote there.
Well, it really is. And Brett, you talked about the importance of catchers to a team. What you mentioned right there, 3 out of those 4 guys were catchers. Lou Gehrig was a first baseman, but Yogi, Elston Howard, Thurman Munson, all catchers. And this team has been so fortunate to have a great legacy of legendary backstops, catching pitches, driving in runs, calling pitches from behind home plate. We've had some real legends.
We have an interesting question here that I think could be a larger topic to discuss, but
Sure.
It's from Jeff. Why do you think Munson never made it into the Hall of Fame? You would think the Veterans Committee would vote him in?
Right. I think in a lot of ways, the Veterans Committee kind of looks at the overall significance of numbers as far as valuing the length of a career, sometimes more than, what is in the prime of a player's career. And that's really an ongoing debate. Some people might say, how good a player is in his prime matters more than an attendance record of showing up and being there long term. Whereas some voters might say, well, really, it matters what you do over the length of your career. And if your career isn't that long, well, you can't really reward somebody for what they didn't do. So I think that there is, and that's just a debate that goes for any Hall of Fame. This conversation can go on in a million different directions. But I think, Thurman played 11 seasons. Had he been able to play a few more seasons, he was under contract with the Yankees through the 1981 season. So he had about 2 1/3 seasons to go. Had he been able to play those additional seasons, I think his numbers probably would have been more favorably received. Of course, he did die a tragic death, and that can't be held against him. But, the 15 years that he was on the ballot for the Hall of Fame, I don't think he ever received more than about 14 or 15% of the vote, and you need 75% to be inducted. And since then, on the Veterans Committee votes, he's just never really had the support. So I really don't know why that is specifically, but I think it probably has to do with the length of his career and, the numbers that he did accomplish versus the numbers that potentially he could have accomplished.
There are a couple other comments and questions. Just folks, I want to get to, we have, I think, one more piece. I want to get to it, or two more pieces, two more.
Yeah.
So I want to get to those before we hit the 7 o'clock hour here. Brian and I are not going anywhere, so don't worry about that. But I want to get to these, and I do want to come back to a couple things that are pretty interesting to discuss, Brian. Right here, I think this might be a bit of a fan favorite. So special to so many Yankees, fans out there through the 70s, because, it was kind of a christening moment that had been a long time coming for the Yanks.
Well, that's true, Brett. Yeah, a lot of fans will say that the bat this home run was used for is their number one moment in all of Yankees history. Keep in mind, after the 1964 World Series, when Mickey Mantle swung that World Series home run bat, the Yankees didn't make the postseason again for a dozen years, until 1976. That was their first American League East championship, and they played the Kansas City Royals in the American League Championship Series, best of 5 series to see who would play the Cincinnati Reds in the World Series. And it came down to Game 5. The score was tied going into the bottom of the 9th inning. And a lot of people forget that in between the top and the bottom of the 9th inning, a lot of fans in the outfield were throwing soda bottles onto the field. And the game had to be stopped for about 5 minutes while the grounds crew went out and picked up all those soda bottles. Well, I do kind of wonder if that might have affected the arm of pitcher Mark Littell, because he'd already thrown an inning or two, and sometimes when a pitcher is standing on the mound on a chilly October night, his arm can tighten up a little bit, because the first pitch that he threw to first baseman Chris Chambliss was a high fastball. Chambliss swung this bat and crushed a home run deep into the right field seats. You can find the video of it online. Great narration of it by Howard Cosell. Chris Chambliss has won the American League pennant for the New York Yankees, as only Howard Cosell can do it. I can't. I make an attempt. I do what I can. And this is the bat that he used to hit that home run. This is on loan from Chris. He loaned this from his personal collection. And you see the Liberty Bell stamp that's on there. We mentioned in the little fun fact up there, 1976 was the United States bicentennial, the 200th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. So all of the Louisville Slugger Bats were stamped with that Liberty Bell logo in 76. So with Chambliss, it almost seems like hitting the home run was the easy part, but rounding the bases was the hard part. Normally, nobody pays any attention to that whatsoever. And the first 90 feet that Chris ran down to first base, piece of cake. But fans were pouring onto the field from the outfield seats, from the box seats. Thousands of fans were pouring onto the field. And over the next 90 feet from first base to second, it was a very different world for Chris. By the time he got to second base, somebody was pulling it out of the ground. So if you look closely in the film of Chambliss rounding the bases, he reaches over and slaps second base as he's rounding. Going to around the spot where the shortstop would be, he actually plowed over somebody. Third base, I think was kind of there. There was a mob of people around Chris by the time he got to third. He got in the neighborhood of home plate and just darted back to the Yankees dugout. I mean, you watch the film of it, it feels like it should have NFL Films music in the background and narration by Chris Berman. It doesn't look like a home run. But he
That's
actually came
fantastic.
out a little bit later with 2 policemen protecting him and put his foot in the spot where home plate would have been before it was dug up by the rowdy crowd. So they were excited again. It was the Yankees' first World Series appearance in 12 years, first American League championship in that dozen years. There was great reason to celebrate. And Chris Chambliss's bat was the one that put us into the World Series against the Cincinnati Reds. And right here it is. It's an iconic moment, an iconic home run in Yankees history, a real museum treasure.
We've got so many treasures, and to wrap up today's segment, but folks, again, Brian, there are a few questions we'll get to, but I want to hit our last piece here, which is, I think when everyone thinks of Reggie Jackson, they can't help but think of larger than life in a lot of ways. Everyone thinks of that 3 home run game in 77's World Series. What I think a lot of folks forget, that was on 3 pitches also, 3 first pitches and 3 at-bats. But, not to take away, he had another historic season in 78 and a great World Series run as well there.
That's right, Brett. And just building on what you said a moment ago, I know there's a lot of questions we haven't been able to get to yet. We're going to get through this piece here, and we're going to address follow-up questions, some of the questions we've had already. Brett and I aren't going anywhere, so please stick around. If you have to go after this piece, that's totally understandable, but there's a lot more Yankees baseball to talk here. Reggie Jackson was brought here as a baseball star. In his words, "I'm not coming to New York to be a star. I'm bringing my star with me." And he'd already established that star status in some great years with the Oakland Athletics in the West Coast. But he came to New York, and that dominance in October is what Reggie came for. I like to say the bigger the game was, the bigger the spotlight, the brighter the spotlight, the better Reggie Jackson was. He was a truly great clutch performer. This uniform was worn during the 1978 season. Now, Reggie's 78 season might be seen as kind of a sequel, if you will, to 77, when he did hit those 3 home runs in the clinching game of the World Series. But his October performance might have been even better than it was in 1977. The Yankees beat the Kansas City Royals in the American League Championship Series, went on and played the LA Dodgers, won the World Series again in 6 games in 1978. In those 10 games combined, Reggie batted .417, which is a mind-boggling number. He had 4 home runs and 14 runs batted in only 10 games. So again, the bigger the game, the bigger Mr. October was. This is the uniform jersey that he wore. Now you can see this is a double knit jersey, meaning it's manufactured out of all synthetic material, as uniforms are today. The Yankees started wearing double knits in 1973. They're much more breathable, more comfortable, more durable, easier to maintain than were the old woolen jerseys. By this time, the player's name and the year that's sewn in the back, the 78, I should say, that's sewn in there is the year that it was worn. 1 is the set, that it is set 1, set 2. Those would be sewn into the back of the uniform jersey's collar. And the tag you see on the right is on the bottom. Wilson is the manufacturer. 46 is the uniform size. So this is a size 46 jersey that Reggie would have worn in 1978. And a little interesting fact about Reggie Jackson, in 1961, Roger Maris hit 61 home runs, as we said earlier. 41 years later, in 2002, Jason Giambi joined the Yankees, and Jason hit 41 home runs in his first year with the Yankees. So in that 41-year stretch between 1961 and 2002, there were only 2 times that a Yankee slugger hit 40 home runs in a season. This team is known as the Bronx Bombers. Not 60 home runs, not 50 home runs, 40 home runs. In 1980, Reggie Jackson hit 41 home runs. And in 1997, Tino Martinez hit 44 home runs. So Tino Martinez and Reggie Jackson are really, if you will, the Yankees record holder for home runs in a single season over that 41-year stretch. But as I said earlier, the bigger the game was, the better Mr. October was. He was absolutely at his peak in the games that mattered most.
And, that does bring us to the end of the program. But as I mentioned, folks, I know there's some questions out there I want to get to. And if you have any other questions, please let us know. Like I said, Brian and I are happy to spend more time here. This is what Brian and I miss most about being at the ballpark is talking to folks. So don't be shy. Ask the questions. Brian, I do want to go back to the shin guards because there was a pretty interesting question that I thought you might find interesting as well.
Sure.
I'm going to read it verbatim because I thought it was an interesting way to put this. The quote, tools of ignorance have come a long way. How much did these shin guards weigh, and how much extra weight did all the equipment, parentheses, chest protector, mask, and shin guards weigh?
I haven't held a chest protector or a a helmet or something from that era of the 1970s, or the catcher's mask in the 1970s. So I can't speak to the weight of those. I really don't know what the weight on those would be. I'd have to check and find out. These shin guards are actually a very thick, very durable plastic. So they're really not very heavy. I'd say each shin guard is probably a pound and a half, maybe 2 pounds. They're really not that heavy. So if you were to strap them on, the additional weight really wouldn't be that significant. But that's a great question.
Steve said, "Do you guys know who was Mr. November?"
Derek Jeter. That's right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, actually, one of mine. I think folks out there can all share in this sentiment, right? The Yankees were known as a home run heritage hitting team.
Right,
We've always had sluggers, and with that, I feel that every Yankee fan has a moment, a home run specific moment that they can, as I say this, you're thinking of one moment. And for me, that Mr. November is actually my home run moment. I think about Derek Jeter, that Game 4 of that World Series in 2001, the stroke of midnight. I mean, I still get goosebumps when I watch the video of it on YouTube. And speaking of which, folks, I actually wanted to mention, you can YouTube that shit, Chris, why am I forgetting the Chambliss home run on YouTube, so you can see exactly what Brian was referring to.
I did this afternoon, yeah.
Yeah, we don't have the video to share with you folks here today, but you can actually do that. See, and I love this. Ann just wrote in. She said her home run moment, Aaron Boone's home run. What was that, 2004 ALCS or DS?
2003 against the Red Sox. Tim Wakefield,
Man, and Boone, I think that's probably his moment as well in his whole career.
Right.
But yeah, I love that everyone has kind of a home run moment that they tie to a moment. And Steve, absolutely, Mr. November was mine. Trent did ask why Mr. October for Reggie. Maybe you can dive into that a bit.
Well, that's a great question, Trent. Mr. October was Reggie Jackson's nickname, and October is when baseball's postseason games are played. The World Series, the series leading up to it, the championship series, the division series, those are all played in October because baseball's regular season usually wraps up at the end of September, maybe spills a little bit into October. They usually try to end somewhere around September 30th. So October is when the postseason is played. And the Yankees were playing the Kansas City Royals in the American League Championship Series in 1977. And Reggie Jackson was not hitting especially well at that point, especially in the American League Championship Series against Kansas City. He actually was benched for one game because there was a Kansas City pitcher, Paul Splittorff, who he just didn't hit very well against. Well, Reggie Jackson and Thurman Munson, there had been some definite friction between those two guys in 1977. So Thurman was talking with a reporter, and he knew of Reggie's fame, of his success that he had in earlier years with the Oakland A's in the World Series and in the postseason. And so Thurman kind of sarcastically said to this reporter, "Why don't you go talk to Reggie? He's Mr. October." So this nickname was kind of a backhanded compliment or offhand slap, whatever you want to call it. It wasn't the compliment that it might have been intended to be, but the name stuck. And Reggie was so dominant, so good in the World Series and in the American League Championship Series leading up to it that it stuck. So Reggie's nickname forever is Mr. October.
There's actually a comment here that I want to share with you, Brian. This is so interesting. And JB asked it. And JB, I guarantee you that Brian and I, if you want to take a minute to email a little more detail about this, if there's any more to share. He was actually sitting in the stands for Reggie Jackson's 400th home run, and it landed right in front of him and his friends.
Nice.
Yeah,
nice.
I gotta say, I wish I'd heard the end of the story was you picked up that ball, JB. But that's an incredible moment to definitely have witnessed in person. Oh, yeah. Let's see what else we got here.
Nobody could rise to the moment like Reggie.
Not at all. I don't see any other questions specifically. Michelle, thank you very much. She just wanted to say thank you to both of us for a great evening. Michelle, I would love doing these things. Like we said, we really, really miss being able to do these things in person. And, I'm going to share something with everyone out there. If you go to Yankee Stadium on a game day, I'd say 99 times out of 100, if you're there on a game day and you visit the museum, you're going to find Brian in the museum. And Brian's usually in a very nice looking suit. He's got his pocket square prim and primed, and which I appreciate. I like dressing well. I have to say that, Brian is always in there to tell a story, to highlight an artifact, to answer a question. So don't be shy next time you're at the ballpark to go in there. If you see me wandering around, just yell, "Hey, tour guide!" I'll probably turn around because I do a lot of tours at the ballpark. Trent asks, why does his bat change? Oh, why did the bat? Oh, so I think that what Trent is asking is why does it says specifically here, why does his bat change color? I think he's referring to why are bats different colors. That's a player preference within some parameters, I know.
Right. Some bats are actually painted at the factory. So some of them actually, when they make contact with the baseball, they actually leave more ball marks. Actually, the white that's on the baseball can kind of rub off. But some of them, it depends on the kind of wood that they're made from. Some of them have different chemical treatments that are allowed, within baseball's rules, as you might say. And some wood just over time just kind of turns a little bit of a darker color. It gets kind of a beautiful, rich brown patina. That's kind of the color of some of Babe Ruth's bats. Some of Babe's bats tend to be a little bit darker. This bat is a little bit lighter, kind of a blonde ash bat. So this one isn't quite as dark. But a lot of bats you'll see today are dark. They're painted black. You didn't really see that so much in the 1970s and earlier, but that's definitely a lot more common today.
I love that question was asked too, because I was actually looking at DJ's bat through the playoffs, and he has a very the wood almost looks unfinished look to it, which I really like that. Yeah, it does. Yeah, it's a really good look. Mickey Mantle Bat is 2 colors.
I'm scrolling through right here. I just want to see.
Yeah, I don't. Maybe I don't see the 2 colors. Maybe he's referring to the red and the green that's on the bat specifically.
The paint that you see on there is actually from the bat racks. The green paint is from the bat rack at Yankee Stadium, and the red paint is from the bat rack at Busch Stadium in St. Louis, and that was Cardinal Red.
Got it. Okay, he said no, the other bat. Let me keep looking at the other bats here. I think those are the only bats we talked about in the program, so I'm not sure of the other 2 colors being asked about here. Trying my darndest to figure it out, but I can't seem to locate what is specifically being referred to here. No big deal. What are the types of
the paint colors on Mickey's bat are from the bat rack?
What are the types of wood used at that time to make wood bats?
Ash was the most common bat back then, as they are today. Maple is used somewhat today, but in those days it was pretty much all ash. In the 1920s, Babe experimented with some hickory bats. There were hickory bats in the 1910s and 1920s, and there were a few times in the late 1920s that Ruth used a Cuban darkwood. I'm not entirely sure what that means, but far and away, ash was the most common wood then as it is now.
To talk about bats, and I think this would be a really interesting place to leave off today for all the folks out there. Brian, could you share the story about the Quadro Belt Bat?
Yeah, I love that story. If you don't know what a Quadro Belt Bat is,
I'll pull up the picture. I'll pull up the picture for everyone.
Else in 1923 when this bat was used.
I'm going to pull this up for everyone, Brian.
All right, go ahead.
But you can keep talking about it.
I'm going to keep on talking. In 1923, the middle of the season, Babe Ruth wasn't real happy with his hitting, so he decided to experiment with a kind of experimental model bat. And this bat was known as a Quadro Belt Bat. Brett's bringing up the picture right here. Quadro Belt meaning that this bat is actually consisted of 4 different pieces of wood that are glued together. There it is. You can see a copy of one on the right. This is a patent that was made for a similar Quadro Belt bat in 1923. That may or may not be the exact same bat that Ruth used, but it's definitely similar. The idea is that a regular bat that's turned on a lathe, some of that wood is a little bit harder and is better to hit with. Some of that wood isn't quite so strong and isn't really the prime wood you want to hit with. The Quadro Belt Bat is 4 different pieces that are actually put together, and each of those pieces is prime wood. That's the best kind of wood for hitting. So these 4 pieces would actually be glued together. Now, this bat had been sent to Babe Ruth by a guy named Sam Crawford, who was a great major league player in the 1900s and 1910s. Wahoo Sam has more triples than does any other player in baseball history. But Sam Crawford sent this bat to Babe Ruth, and he experimented with it from July 2nd to August 11th. Well, over that stretch, his batting average was .448. And to put in comparison, 300 is a great batting average. You hit .448, that's absolutely through the roof. Babe loved this Quadro Belt Bat so much, he actually gave it a nickname. He called it Betsy Bingle. Now, bingle is an old-fashioned term for a single, a one-base hit. We really don't use that term anymore. But Babe loved Betsy Bingle. Well, the guy who didn't love Betsy Bingle was Ban Johnson, the American League president. Ban Johnson in mid-August ruled that this bat could no longer be used because it was comprised of 4 different pieces of wood. And because the wood was glued together, he said that the glue in it is affecting the bat speed, and it gives the hitter an unfair advantage. Now, Miller Huggins, who was the Yankees manager, protested vehemently. He said, wait a minute, the rule book doesn't say that you have to use a bat only comprised of 1 piece of wood, but that was the end of it. Betsy would mingle no more. No more Betsy Bingle, but Babe still batted .394 for that season. So I think he did pretty well. And that year, by the way, 1923, was the only season in which Babe Ruth was American League Most Valuable Player. In those days, you could only win MVP 1 time, and Babe's season was 1923. So we received that very nifty-looking scroll that you see on the left side of your screen right there to commemorate his designation as Most Valuable Player.
That's so cool. And, last there was a question that came in from Catherine.
Sure.
Are there weight limitations on bats?
I believe there is a minimum weight. I think the minimum
Yes.
weight is something like 30 and a half. Don't quote me on that. It's somewhere right in that neighborhood, somewhere around 30 and a half ounces. You really don't want to go too light, because if you go too light, the ball's not going to travel very far when you hit it. But the idea with a lighter bat is you have lighter bat speed. Now, there's no maximum weight. A player can use a bat as heavy as he would like. I think the heaviest bat in baseball is, I know Chris Davis of the Baltimore Orioles a couple of years ago was using a bat that was about 38 ounces. And I think that's what Alfonso Soriano used to use too. Now, 38 ounces is a very heavy piece of lumber by today's standards, because again, the lighter the bat, the better the bat speed you can get it around. So most players would choose not to use a heavier bat. The lighter the bat, the better. But yeah, I think the minimum is somewhere around 30 and a half ounces, something like that. But players tend to go a little bit lighter. And Brett, if we can switch back to the original slideshow and look at Chris Chambliss's bat. I know there was a question. I think we reinterpreted Trent's question here, I should say. He was talking about on the handle where you can see where I think it might have been some of the pine tar was put on, or where the handle was sanded down a little bit. Do you want to speak on that one?
So if I had to guess, it's from pine tar, in fact. So they utilize as a player goes at the bat, if they're using their bare hands or batting gloves, the wood can be slick to a degree, right? Especially if it's finished, as you see, this bat is finished with the gloss on it. So in order to help hold on to the bat, they utilize pine tar, which is what it is. So if you go up to a tree and you get some of that sticky sap, it makes your hands sticky, and it's very, the oils from it are going to seep into the wood when they're applying the pine tar to the bat. Nowadays, you don't see pine tar. You see it definitely, but I think you see a lot more of stick and pine tar. So you'll see those heavy buildups that occur on guys like helmets and bats, predominantly more, even on jerseys, predominantly more so today than in the past, because that stick is almost like a glue. And between what the players will do is they'll put stick on, and then they put pine tar over it, and it gets thicker and thicker and browner and darker. And that's probably what happened here with the Chris Chambliss bat.
Right. I would agree with that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, folks, thank you very, very much for joining us today. I've had a blast. Again, Brian and I, we love doing these things. Feel free to email us anytime, either tours@yankees.com or museum@yankees.com. They're both easy. You'll be able to get a hold of either one of us. We really appreciate you spending some time with us. We all miss baseball more than you know. Wish that the Yankees, I don't want to talk about last Friday. We're going to deviate from that quickly. But you know what they say. We'll get them next year. Wish you all the best of health. Stay well. Stay healthy. Brian, if you have anything to say.
Just that it's been a pleasure. I've had a great time, and I just hope everybody who's joined us this evening has had as much fun as you and I have, Brett. So thank you, everybody, and good night.
Stay well, stay safe, and remember, everyone, go Yankees.
So that's it for this show. Thank you for watching, everybody. And like, share, subscribe. And I'll see you folks on the next one. So long, and thank you for watching the webinar. Adios.